Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
A moment from one of two services this week for 6 victims of that horrific shooting at a Quebec City mosque. Political leaders of all stripes were there to pay their respects, including the Prime Minister and Quebec's Premier. They pleaded for tolerance, but also for some sober self-reflection. In Quebec, some are pointing the finger at so-called radio poubelle, or trash radio, where shock jocks are accused of espousing racism and xenophobic remarks for entertainment. And this week, a man was arrested at his home in Montreal for what he said on Twitter. He said, "I need you to tell me, how do we stop Sharia law before it hits U.S. shores? I can only think of killing Muslims while praying. You?" Now, he said he was being sarcastic. There have been more than 170 reports of hate speech to the Sûreté du Québec since the attack. Joining me to talk about this once again, Katie O'Malley of the Ottawa Citizen, freelance columnist Susan Riley, Globe and Mail columnist and ubiquitous author John Ibbotson. John, everyone, I want you to listen to this first, what Justin Trudeau had to say at the funeral on Friday.
Il est plus que temps.
It is high time that the people behind this hateful speech, politicians, radio hosts, or other public personalities, realize the wrong, the hurt that can be caused through their words.
John, I'll begin with you. John, does Justin Trudeau have a point here? Do we all need to be more responsible in our language in this country?
Oh, absolutely. The new obscenity, the new pornography is language, and it's been growing for a couple of decades now. Using the cover of free speech to spout hate. The Americans have been doing it more than we have been doing it. They've been doing it longer than we've been doing it. They've been doing it in a more vile way than we've been doing it. And they got Donald Trump as the product. And we have to be very careful in this multicultural, tolerant, diverse society, this very, very Canadian society. There are voices of hate, and some of those voices of hate appear on air, or appear on Twitter, or appear on Facebook, and try to mask what they're saying in terms of it's just free speech, or it's just sarcasm, or it's just attitude. No, it's not. And we have to call it out and tell it for what it is. It is not responsible. It fosters a climate of intolerance. I'm not saying that speech contributed to the tragedy in Quebec City, but it sure didn't help.
How do you tell the difference, though, John?
It's like the judge said about pornography. I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it. And you do too. You know when someone is being responsibly critical, and you know when somebody is just trying to stoke emotion, trying to turn your crank, trying to up the voltage or the ampage of the debate. And that kind of stuff is dangerous and it's damaging, and we have to call it out.
And Susan, isn't the opposite also dangerous? In the interest of trying not to offend somebody, you actually step on their ability to express themselves.
Well, the danger is that you drive hate underground, but you don't eliminate it. And then the people who are resentful and feel silence start talking about political correctness and whatnot. I don't think that, I think that's a partial approach, I guess, but to my mind, another politician I'm desperately trying to think who, it may have been Philippe Couillard, said this week that the best remedy is so simple. It is to introduce yourself to a Muslim, to make it a point to meet some Muslim people. Basically, it's on a person-by-person, relationship-by-relationship basis that hatred dissolves, that things change. It happened with the gay and lesbian community, and I believe that that's the most sensible way forward. It's not always practically easy. Often the deepest cores of resentment and prejudice are in places where there is no Muslim population to speak of, but that strikes me as a more effective approach.
And Katie, do you think it's fair to say that this kind of talk radio shock jocks stoke anti-immigrant sentiment, or perhaps they tap into it? It's a reflection of society. And what do you think?
I think it's definitely a bit of both. I mean, this has sort of been a long-standing argument and concern over hate speech in general, is this notion of if you sort of ignore it and let it go on, should you give it any attention, or is that, do you risk just giving those views a wider audience? And these are things we've struggled with on hate speech, as John said, for years. I think that one of the differences here is because there are so many different platforms and so many different ways for this speech to come forward. It's not just like you listen to your radio station and get your 2 minutes of hate. You can then go on to Twitter and discuss it, using a hashtag with other people. And there is like a revving up of the sentiment, which isn't to say that, it would be impossible and probably a bad idea to just sort of crack down on it and really bring down a hardline policy. But yeah, I do think that other media outlets, politicians, people do have to call it out. We have to stop pretending that if we ignore it, it'll go away, because it really won't. Sometimes we do have to kind of grab it out, bring it out on the surface and say, okay, look at this ball of hate. Do you want to be associated with this? Because that's what it is. And counter just obvious, misstatements of fact. The Sharia law one is one that is a good example, because there are people who legitimately believe, based on the media that they've been reading and the radio stations and the various internet forums, they believe that there are proposals to impose Sharia law across Canada. It is bonkers. It is ridiculous. But if you don't correct it, then it persists and it becomes a accepted fact. So that's the other danger.
Okay. And Jean-François Lisée, of all people, the head of the Parti Québécois, led by example this week. During the heated debate about reasonable accommodation, at one point he suggested that people could hide rifles under their burqas. And he acknowledged this week that that was an inflammatory thing to say and he shouldn't have said it. Good for him. That doesn't solve the tensions that underlie Quebec society, but that's one example of somebody trying to correct a mistake.
So the general consensus is that words do matter. So let's listen to Philippe Couillard, the Premier of Quebec, and how he tries to reclaim the Muslim words that for different reasons so many people associate with terrorism. This is from the funeral on Friday.
We heard that hope expressed in our common language, French, but also in Arabic, with words that were explained to us. May peace be with you. On behalf of our merciful God, Inshallah, God willing, recognition of our God. Those words are often associated with violence and terrorism, but we now know what those words are really associated with as well for the Muslim community.
Allah Akbar was the other one that he had said, which is often associated with terrorists holding a bomb before they set it off. How would you, and that moment when it was a standing ovation and he put his hand over his heart, how would you say, Susan, that Philippe Couillard has handled himself through this crisis?
Brilliantly. I think I really have been so impressed with Philippe Couillard on a number of levels. He's been eloquent in both official languages, obviously straying into Arabic as well. He has been sincere, direct, and just so convincing. I think he felt this deeply. I really think it brought out his best qualities that most of the country, and including me as a Quebecer, were not aware of. Justin Trudeau was also clearly moved by the events, obviously, and we know well his position on diversity, but he always sounds a bit rehearsed when he's speaking, whereas with Couillard, it seemed to come straight from his heart.
Yeah, and of course the thing is, it's not just something that emerged at that memorial service.
No.
Premier Couillard has been advocating for tolerance, for level-headedness, for common sense approach to these issues for many years. I mean, this goes back to the days of the Parti Québécois and the cultural values test and reasonable accommodation. There has always been a strain within Quebec society where there is a larger Muslim population because many immigrants are brought in from Africa, French-speaking countries in Africa, and where, of course, there is a strong national sense in a way that there isn't in the rest of Canada. There has always been that tension